You're listening to the Adventuring Party for the third week of January 2024. This week, a long, rambling, directionless podcast about how your RPG campaigns could be shorter. The Adventuring Party, discussing tabletop and radio gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party. I'm Dave.
I'm Eoin.
And I'm Shane. And we're here this week to discuss a little bit of what we like to call gamer psychology that always sort of bugged me a little. So we've previously done episodes about how to run a long campaign, how to run big epic campaigns that stretch for a year or more. And listening back to that again, and I noticed that we sort of come to the conclusion that the default for most people would be something like a 6 or 9 month campaign, and then freakish geniuses like Eoin would run 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 year campaigns. That would seem to be what the expectation would be for most of gaming. But recently, there was a article on the infamous Alexandrian gaming blog, which put forward the idea that there's nothing stopping a person or a group having a full and complete RPG experience in an hour or two. Like, if you have a really strongly framed scene and some pre-generated characters, you could very easily run a very short, complete, and satisfying RPG experience. And that just got me thinking again. Something that's sort of in the back of my head is just like, why do we, as a gaming culture, assume the longer campaign is the default? Why do we assume that every time we set a table and dice, it's as part of some months or years long epic? I have my own theories, but gentlemen, if you'd like to go first.
Well, I'll go to throw out a few touchstones that might inform such an idea. That, first of all, like, the original campaigns were, for the most part, very much ongoing creatures that could go on for years, as in they were like less campaigns that, as we'd understand them, more a game environment that different parties would operate in.
This is the Gygax and Dave Arneson model.
Yeah, and the other thing that comes to mind is an awful lot of touchstones around fantasy, which, let's face it, is the largest chunk of RPGs, are big epics like Lord of the Rings or 10-book-long epics crossing continents and defeating dark gods and what have you. Like, they're very popular and have been for decades and decades.
I do think that's those are some smoking guns. Hida, do you have any special theories?
Yeah, I think people like the idea of, we'll be able to play from a low level to play to a high level, or we'll be able to do all this cool progression, and we'll start out as weak and we'll get strong, and that people feel like if they're going to make an effort around designing a character and thinking about backstory and building, they want to feel like their effort is going to pay off. No one goes, awesome, I'm going to play this game once, I'm never going to touch it again. Everyone wants to think, I'm going to play this game for yonks. I'm going to get huge out of this. It's cool for me to spend money on this, spend time on this, because I'm going to get I'm going to get huge amounts of play out of this. I think that's what now, I don't know if people go in wanting years necessarily, but I definitely think people go in wanting a substantial experience. Now, that is going to vary based on the person. Some people might think of a substantial experience as 12 sessions, which would be kind of 3 months. Or they might be happy with, they want a year. Like, I'm towards the long end of stuff, which is funny because it warps my perceptions of good and bad RPGs. Or, well, not warps them, but it changes my perceptions of good and bad RPGs. You have no idea how many RPGs I get scathing about because they don't hold up after a few sessions of play mechanically. And then you have to go and kind of try to fix it, or you deal with the fact that, the game's busted. I don't want to tell you. And so there's a bunch of RPGs that people rate highly that I'm like, have you people actually played that for longer than 2 sessions? Because 100 XP in that game is no longer balanced. And so I would have a different approach on a lot of RPGs. I would play short run RPGs for some stuff, but it needs to support that play, right? And not just, oh yeah, our progression system is terrible. That's why our games are deliberately short. Or we have no progression system because that's how modern RPGs should be, which is code for we couldn't balance the progression system on this game, so we just removed it and or didn't put in one so that you're never going to break RPGs that way. And that's cowardly designer work there. That annoys me quite a lot. Like I think I've been playing the 2D20 Star Trek system. The character progression in that is very limited because the characters are like Star Trek characters, so they start out very competent, and making them more competent would make them probably omnicompetent. Whereas as you start out, you're kind of a specialist in your field, which is kind of what it is meant to be like. What's kind of like what it's meant to be like in Star Trek. And one of the broadening out you do is you basically develop secondaries. One of the ways you do it is you develop secondary characters who you can flip in and bring in for a scene instead, you know? I enjoy short games. I've played a couple of games which are this is a box set, or this is a starter set, or this is a limited run, and I'm perfectly happy playing that for 4 or 5 sessions and being done. But it has an overhead in terms of effort as well. And we'll come back to what the other thing people hate about short campaigns, which is I have to learn a new system. And people will do anything rather than learn a new system. They will do anything at all. They will go to any lengths to avoid having to learn things. Watch all the people who tried desperately to find a reason that it was okay to still play D&D, even though everything was telling them we should stop playing D&D for a bit while these guys are doing what they're currently doing. It's like, is there any way? Is there any way I can get out of having to change? Please tell me a way.
Oh no, I recall that seeing a number of people try even to the point of trying to defend WotC's actions, like rather than abandon the game they've invested so much in, like financially and in terms of time, like
100%.
I do want to touch back on one of the things that Dave said, because it's an interesting counterpoint. Well, not counterpoint to anything. There's an interesting balance there of the standard fantasy story being the Lord of the Rings plus 10-book epic, whereas Lord of the Rings is a chunky piece of work, but it pales in comparison to the modern fantasy classic. Where if you don't get 7 books out of it, you're basically lost to the annals of history. And that's an interesting point, because the original D&D campaigns were sort of developed around the flex point where that started as a thing in fantasy literature. Whereas Gary Gygax and Dave Arson very much grew up in the environment of the fantasy short story, where stuff like Conan or Jack Vance were considered the standard, where you get your monthly copy of Weird Tales, and it would have 5 or 6 different short stories with vague notions of being a part of an ongoing serial, and that was their thing. And they built their game with the assumption of what we might call vignettes, like the different heroes would get one adventure, head off, drink it all away, come back for another adventure, like Fafhrd the Grey Mouser.
or Conan.
Yeah, or Conan. That was their assumption, and that's why very much why one of the reasons they built D&D the way they did is because the assumption of the episodic adventure of the heading out, exploring dungeon, come back with treasure, get some XP for it, lose it in silly ways, and head back out. But the audience that they found themselves selling to was now coming into the, I want to say fancy doorstop, but I don't have a good name for like when you have 7 doorstops in a row, because that's how fancy went after Lord of the Rings. And then just say like people who are used to these gigantic on-running series, and thus their perception was of fantasy as massive sweeping epics, where even if for 3 books the main character's doing nothing, all of the individual bits that they're doing is very important to them. So we should definitely focus in on their various love life woes and the 15 random characters they have on the way to the next town. Gygax and Garrison clearly intended an ongoing campaign as a thing, but I don't think they didn't realize that it would be an ongoing continuous campaign as opposed to an ongoing episodic campaign was what they were expecting. Well, yeah, it is a fair point. Episodic fantasy is not tremendously strong as a cultural touchstone as it maybe once was.
Yeah, no, just think about the famous or infamous Appendix N list. Like say out of say the original Appendix N, in earlier versions of D&D, how many of those books are still widely read or even in print?
Not many of them, as has been pointed out. That's an entire page long list, and the only author in it who's still alive is Michael Moorcock.
Who's getting on himself?
Yeah, I think he's still occasionally releasing stuff. He never did quite get rid of those debtors or creditors. But yeah, no. A, they're all very old books, and B, they're books designed to keep shelves stocked, as I'd like to say. A lot of their stuff was, I mean, like, I'm pretty sure of the books on the original Appendix N, the longest is Lord of the Rings, as you might expect. Unless you were to really put together all of Moorcock's works or all of the Fafhrd Grey Mouser things, and you might rival Lord of the Rings, but even then, most of these things are one-off novels or the collected works of a short story writer, and that's again the touchstone. And yeah, those things were sort of meant to be disposable. A lot of them were meant for pulp magazines and pulp novels. They were meant to stock shelves, not so much take up shelf space as today's, let's say, doorstop fantasy is meant to do.
Yeah, no, pulp as a genre was effectively just not quite disposable entertainment, but not far off it.
Yeah, it is very much the same vein as comic books in its own way.
There were guys back then who were writing like a book a day and stuff, weren't there? Or it was like that. They were basically just one of them was the guy who was just continually narrating into a dictaphone his book and then sending it off to be typed up.
Yeah, I mean that does sound entirely plausible because yeah, it was just very prolific, and Appendix N it probably at the time was a wonderful short list of this is the high quality stuff. That's probably how you would have seen it back then, but now from the perspective of modern day, these are quaint like genre pieces, each quirky in its own way, but still very much old fashioned, hard to read, hard to get their hold of in a lot of cases because the rights are in a dozen different magazines or split over things, and you know it's all just so obscure that most people wouldn't bother. And I mean, if you go back to some places like Chapters, I mean, even if you went to Chapters, you probably would find a lot of that kind of 60s and 70s stuff. You would probably find some 80s stuff or maybe some reprints, but it's just not easy to get that stuff. But what we're saying here is that was sort of a lost interpretation of how fantasy works, and in a sense how the storytelling of an RPG would work is that for the touchstones that the designers had and the touchstones that the audience had were very different, and the audience through their fiction was given the impression of, oh, we're going to have the long epic soap opera lives with great sweeping events of our characters over many many sessions slash chapters slash books. And I don't think I feel like it's gotten a bit better. There seems to be a few more shorter novels on the shelves these days, but it's still I think at the very least I think we've gone from doorstopper books to more episodic material, but there's still an expectation of, oh, there's going to be more of this going on. This series is probably not going to end for a long time, and that carries over to the logic of setting up a campaign where people say, well, obviously this is going to be an epic that goes on over a long time. I did have another specific point about the old setup I wanted to go over. Folks, you have probably listened to our, many episode epic reading of Gygax's original DMG, and how the point kept coming up that basically nothing that Gygax said made any sense unless you were running one of these open table, long form campaigns where you'd have constant inflow of first level characters getting killed by goblins, while the accursed high level adventurers led by the ever to be thwarted Rob Kuntz ran around the higher level sections of your campaign setting and stole everything that wasn't nailed down.
Yeah, and a few things that were.
Yeah. But my point was that Gygax sort of sells the long form campaign before anything else. I don't think Gygax would have seen a meaningful difference between what we would call a one shot and what we would call a group of players who played one session and never came back. I don't think he had that language because these are things that developed over years of RPG play. I think, but to him, where DD was in part sort of a side thing to his ongoing wargaming ambitions, in some ways.
Like Gygax's thing though was he would run a game and then people would show up, right?
Mm-hmm.
He didn't need to recruit players.
Yeah,
He was just like, I'm running my game. Who's showing up? And people would show up. And even if it was just like one person, he would run a game then, right?
yeah, absolutely.
And he was in a circumstance where he was able to do that kind of consistently, and everyone was talking about playing his game, so he always had players.
Yeah,
And no one else, and at that point, no one else had the game because it was just so a bunch of his notes probably and his own stuff in his head. And so if you wanted to play, you had to go talk to him.
yeah, absolutely. And that environment meant that whatever system was, he basically had to come up with a setup which accommodated all these come and go players. And for him, the way that made sense was this sort of open table, constant campaign setting where he had the touchstone of Greyhawk, even if very few people would see even a significant part of it. If there was to be such a thing as a one shot, didn't look meaningfully different from how he ran just your average starter session for anyone else. And because he didn't have that language, because as I say, he was at the start of all of it, he couldn't. What he was doing is breathless selling of D&D's concept in the first couple of D&D books. He couldn't communicate that to thing, and therefore those ideas didn't, go into the bedrock of gaming the same way all of his other ideas did. And while certainly people are chipping away that bedrock now, it does leave this lasting impression of, oh yeah, you're supposed to have a table of 10 people, you're supposed to play to all hours, do all these different sandbox activities, and over the course of years you will be slowly leveling up to level 15 and fighting 3 gods per round and all that sort of malarkey. Yeah, it's. I don't think he intended to stop various styles of gaming. I just don't think he really understood them, and he thus couldn't recommend them in the same way he does his own style. If Arneson was later to think, oh, maybe there is something to just setting up a game for like one session or 5 sessions, his voice was very truncated by all the incidents that happened. Yeah, he didn't really get his advanced gaming thoughts out there. So the development of as we say, the short campaign style was very much left to indie people to sort of build up from first principles over the course of probably the 90s and 2000s.
Actually, I want to ask a question there, right? Because D&D in the early 80s certainly had modules, which were what amounted to short campaigns. Like you go in, you do whatever Expedition to the Border Peaks or Palace of the Silver Princess or something. And that was effectively, this is a module. And you could string them together. They kind of sort of intended them to be strung together along the codes, right? Like A1, A2, so forth like that. But they were effectively short self-contained adventures. You could, you didn't have to do them in order. Like, they weren't adventure paths at that stage. So it was just like, yeah, you could pick this up, play this whenever. So they would have been au fait with the concept of this is, this is an evening runner or a 2 evening game.
That was, yeah, that was probably the biggest element that they gave to it, is that they eventually stopped the very strict, you have to bring a character to the right level of this game where you're just going to get smushed, that they did at some conventions. Eventually they did package each of their modules with a group of adventurers who of vaguely appropriate level. There's someone to work through the adventure that they've been given. So, like, because I imagine, pretty sure they probably had gotten complaints about this at previous conventions before they actually started releasing content, because it was like a good 4 years, I believe, between the first release D&D and the first real official TSR modules. I'm pretty sure they were technically for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, the Giants series.
And then they also had were the convention games first. Because they had tournaments.
Absolutely, the convention games came first. They were preformed, and a lot of the modules were based on previous convention games.
So those would definitely they would be deliberately, they're not a campaign game. This is, you go in, you play your tournament game, and somebody wins, and a table wins, I assume. And that's that, right?
Wouldn't those be seen as very different to campaigns, though, as in this isn't your regular game? Or maybe I'm incorrect there.
They were seen as different, but they're also seen as a very important part of the hobby. Again, this is sort of anecdotal, but my understanding was, like, originally the expectation was that people would bring their own D&D characters from their own games to conventions to play. That's my understanding. But I imagine this did not last that many years, because, as I said, by 1979, I want to say, when the Against the Giants modules came out, they were starting to include pre-gen characters at the back of these modules. Certainly by Tomb of Horrors getting its official release, Tomb of Horrors came with a bevy of 10th level characters to be horribly smushed.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. In terms of a timeline.
But yeah, like, so it's not like when we say, I'm not trying to overgeneralize. Like, obviously there were elements, but those developed over the first few years. But my point is that they weren't lionized the same way that the campaign play was. At least I don't get that impression. Again, we're sort of looking back into the murky past as we go through all this.
Yeah, that's a fair way of describing it.
Yeah. So, and of course, there's an entire industry of blogs over the last 20 years dedicated to decoding what did Gygax mean. It's not that there weren't elements of having one shots, having short campaigns, having, playing for starting with a level 5 character and playing for 10 sessions or something. That still happened. It just wasn't the assumed default. And I guess we're trying to get to is that partly that was the fictional environment, the fantasy literature environment that people were using as basis, and part of it was the unique circumstances in which D&D was set up. But you mentioned something earlier, Owen, and I do think it is something we wanted to come up with, is getting people to invest in a game, and the paradox of, is does commitment make it easier or harder to get a game? Does having a long game make it easier to commit versus a one-off piece of nonsense?
I think it makes it easier for some people to go, I will bother spending my time here, and other people who are more time limited, less likely to commit. That it kind of depends what stage your life you're in, or what are the expectations in your life. If you say one shot, some people with young children will go, yes, please, desperate. I need to get out of the house once. I can only do once though. Once every like in 15 years I can play again. But right for now, I need a one shot, and I need to talk to adults for a little bit, even if it's about D&D. You know.
Yeah. Whereas the Onyx, like, this is always something. I know I keep talking about early in AD, but it always kind of fascinates me how, looking at the early D&D writings, how Gygax seems to be almost unaware that he's not actually selling D&D by the thousands to an unheard of group of middle-aged wargamers just like him, but that actually, D&D is being bought by, 12-year-old children and college students. Like, it always find it fascinating and hilarious, like, that he just doesn't seem to know who his audience was, or the idea that D&D had an audience beyond people exactly like him.
There's a charm to that, though. It's not marketed to hell because no one knows about marketing yet in that space. Which is good. A more unrefined experience.
Yeah, the closest thing they had to marketing was zines, and getting Gary Gygax to write a editorial screed against the horrors of giving um, first level characters magic items or any sort of break at all. In the editorial of a Dragon magazine, or what was it, the Strategic Arm or something, was the first magazine before. They had a couple of different TSR publications, but yeah, he would actually get interviewed in various other magazines as well. There was like a little industry of semi-professional zines at the time. This would have been one of the things that bright-eyed young proto gamers would have picked up and gone over, looking for a scrap of gaming material. It is sort of the thing. Is it's like different people have different gaming requirements, and some people are going to react way more positively, way more negatively to stuff like having one shots or short campaigns, or the long campaign. But in a way, because people who prefer short campaigns have an inherently limited connection to the gaming space, I don't think they have the same sway over what gaming culture is like that people who like long campaigns do. People who like long campaigns are going to they may not have more sessions overall. There's a certain group that would, have a different one shot every night or every week or whatever. But because they have this long sustained kind of like a tidal wave building up, that sort of gives them a bit more influence over the sort of gaming zeitgeist, and their input, their insight into it, have more weight in the community because the one shot people, they have their game whenever they can, and then they head off back to the rest of their lives, and therefore they aren't breathlessly talking about the advantages of campaign play on all the forums and blogs and such.
The other thing is that licensed games don't exist initially, and licensed games are way better for one shots and short play.
Yeah, well, you're going to get that interested audience of people who are into, say the franchise without, and then there's a game for this franchise.
Yeah, but it's not just that. It's that you can go, I don't have to explain this setting to you. I don't have to give you 300 proper nouns explaining what this thing is. Like if you said, I want to play Alpha War, I'd say, okay, I can give you kind of probably a 5-minute Alpha War primer, or a half-hour one, or a 3-hour one, or as long as you like, really, and then we can talk for hours about what Alpha War is. Or I can say it's Star Wars, man. You've seen Star Wars, right? Grand, let's go. Or it's Star Trek, or it's Blade Runner. And it was interesting, we played the Blade Runner starter set. There's like 3 scenes that are directly lifted from Blade Runner or the Blade Runner 2049. They're like directly lifted. And I know it's grand. It's perfectly fine. It's really entertaining. But it is Blade Runner. You will play it and be like, yes, that was a Blade Runner game. It did Blade Runner things, And I think one-shots are good for that because you can go, I don't have to explain the setting to you. I don't have to explain the metaphysics. You explain any stuff, I just be like, yeah, that guy with a laser sword? Yeah, you're one of them. Done.
And that is a good point, is that most licensed games will take the effort to make sure that there is a playable, balanced set of the main characters in the back of the book somewhere. So you can't just go, hey, you're Han Solo, you're Luke Skywalker, you're Princess Leia, here's the sheets, go.
Or XPs have said characters at least.
Or XPs, yeah, that also true. But yeah, that is an advantage that the licensed game has over the original work, as we might say. Actually, go ahead.
Yeah, no, a point occurred to me. Say, if you try to combine the two, a franchise game in a long campaign, it can be done, but pretty much inevitably, a campaign at a table is going to drift away from, let's call it the pure franchise. Like Endor has been blown to pieces. That didn't go so well. The changes keep spiraling off. So if a new person comes in, you can't really just say, "Oh, Star Wars." It's Star Wars, but things have gone a bit differently. And here's how. And you're running into the same sort of background description problems that Owen was alluding to.
Yeah, that's true. There's a certain point it was like, do you still have the advantage of accessibility, or has it gone away through the legions of gamer stories that would be required to explain it all to you?
Yeah.
Another element, actually, that occurs to me now is the fact that box sets and starter sets have gone by the wayside after a fair bit, other than the stuff that D&D makes. I mean, they've come back the last couple of years, but there was a giant chunk between like the 90s, let's say the start of 5th Ed, where starter sets and nice little boxes were basically only a D&D thing, or as I say, a licensed RPG thing. And the majority of games in the middle would have just assumed, you know what an RPG is. Spend 6 months planning a campaign based on all this books we got.
That's partly an economic thing, though, because became, I think, very difficult for a while to print a box set. And then China got into board game production, and it became really easy to print a box set. So, like, doing because the thing is, a box set should have stuff like it should have books, but also maps, but maybe some cardboard tokens.
Maybe even some minis.
Yeah, and that became a lot easier once China had geared up for doing that cheaply, because RPG margins be hella tight, yo. There's a ton of great box set products. The Swedish guys do tons of them now. They're doing Kickstarters for them regularly. There's been box sets for each one or upcoming of the Cubicle 7 game lines. So like people are doing them now quite a lot. So they've made a big comeback, and they often have a self-contained kind of campaign that might last kind of 4 or 5 sessions, might be a bit longer, might be only a 1 or 2 session dealy, and go off and play one of those, and that's your intro to the setting.
Yeah.
And so it's come back. It's come back as a, hey, I could buy this for 30, 40, 50 euros, and we'll get an evening or 2 evenings or 3 evenings worth of play out of it, which is perfectly fine value if you think about it, compared to like going to the cinema.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, so absolutely, it's a good thing and it's a big advantage, and I think it may coincide a little bit with sort of the modern return of short form gaming, as we might call it. But there was this giant chunk of time when the economics didn't make sense, and people assumed that every RPG player wanted no starter stuff. I hate that there was an RPG section in every game, and will rail on the forums about it every time I see one.
Occasionally somebody comes up with an interesting spin on it or something insightful to say, but yes, if you've read one, you've generally read 99 of 100 of them.
Yeah, but again, it's the thing is, it's not that it's a bad idea. It's just that the wrong kind of people may be complaining about it. I mean, we don't want to. We're not here to talk about getting new people into the game. That's not the topic here. But it is sort of we're not very accommodating to the person who wants to play a game only a couple of times, or only for a few months, or it just wants to give a sampler to some friends just for some variety. That is again something that's being fixed as we have the grand proliferation of the itch.io one page RPG, which is really helping to push the concept of short form games where it's a one session or even just an afternoon's fun, but it's still role play. Wacky adventures like Dr. Magnet Hands is sort of in this interesting interplay between being a party word game and an RPG. It's a bit of silly fun, but it's also an interesting way of putting role-playing elements into something you might ordinarily consider just a bit of wordplay nonsense. But it is an example of, in the modern day we are breaking down this barrier of like every gaming experience is meant to be this long, months long, years long epic, but it is still considered the default that it's not really an RPG unless it's a long term commitment. And I don't know, maybe that is a positive way to end on, is the fact that this idea is slowly going away, and we are getting more and more of the idea of role playing games as just a casual thing you can do of a weekend, or of a lunch break if you set up right.
No, it's absolutely doable. There are, and I know of people who have run games in their work lunch breaks. That's yeah. If you're organized and you've got people interested, it's absolutely doable.
I love dipping into another setting, another system. It's just that some systems don't provide much framework for doing that. A lot of them aren't doing the starter adventure anymore, which is key to the one shot. And it needs to be designed carefully, it needs to explain how the game works, explain what the gameplay loops are, and if it does that well, it's great fun. If it doesn't, and the GM is going to fumble around to figure it out, it can be a bit rough. So, it's an art that isn't quite lost, but is sometimes a bit. It's undervalued because people go, "Oh, that's a waste of space in a core book," and I say, "Okay, fine, you can decide it's a waste of space in a core book, but it's not a waste of space to do it as a PDF. It's not a waste of space to go to someone. Oh, you want to play this game? Play this adventure first. That is not a bad thing, because hey, worst case, you play the adventure and you get an evening's entertainment out of it, and that might be okay for you. Might be like, you know what, I got to play that. That was cool. I am all right with spending my €50 and playing that. It'd be lovely if everyone had chipped in 10 as well, but life's life.
Well, I think we can leave this session as a one shot, although we may. If you would like us to extend this into a mini campaign or even an ongoing campaign that lasts for years, you can hit us up on our social media. Technically, we still have a Twitter, but we're on Facebook and we are on Discord. Link in the show notes to find us there, and beg us to keep going, because you just need a few more levels of internet rage before you answer us back properly.
Yeah, join the server.
It is a bit of a crack. But for now, this session and this party is over. Thanks for listening to The Adventuring Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there, or talk to our Twitter account at AdventuringPTY, or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventuringparty. We can also be contacted directly by email at party@theadventuringparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, come join our Discord server, linked in the show notes. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike on Version 3 license.